Cherish it. Cherish your bride. Cherish the moment. Beautiful. All these people that
beatboxing.
Hey guys.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good.
Awesome. So we're here to talk to you about social aspects of Pacific Rim. So it's all the good stuff: feminism, diversity, racial diversity, and like sexual aspects. Hi, I'm Amber.
Hi.
I jumped into this fandom by accident. I was drawn to a movie, and that movie changed my life. So here I am.
My name is Solace, and I was born and raised in the U.S., but my father's Japanese, and we used to watch monster movies together, like Gojira and Gamera. And in fact, as soon as I saw Knifehead, I was thinking it's Guron, Gamera versus Guron. So I was very excited because to know that Pacific Rim was coming out. I was looking forward to it for about a year because Guillermo del Toro is one of my favorite directors. And I loved everything about the concept, and when the movie came out, it fulfilled almost every single one of my expectations in terms of how awesome it was. And so that's just sort of my connection to Pacific Rim. I'm also a writer. I write mixed orientation, which mostly means bisexual, erotic romance with Karina Press, which is a division of Harlequin. And I've had 2 books published with them and through. My focus is very much multicultural and interracial romance. So I have talked a lot about that and written a lot of stuff about that. So that's what I do.
I'm Coco. I've never done anything interesting in my entire life. I don't know how I got into Pacific Rim fandom. I couldn't tell you. I think one day I was like, wow, that looks like a really bad movie. And the next day I was running a Bing Bang. So there's nothing interesting about me.
I'm Jamie. I likewise kind of fell into it because I thought the previews were horrible, and then I got dragged in the movie, and then this happened. The social aspects are kind of interesting for me in a lot of ways. I'm one of those hidden minorities. I'm actually a secret Hispanic. Don't tell anybody. I'm actually Cuban. And I'm also 2 of the letters in the queer alphabet soup, being the B and the T. So we'll talk more about that later.
Alright, so I'm going to start us off with what do you think that the success of this diverse movie is going to do to the film industry? Well, guys, I give you these questions in advance so you be prepared. And you've got nothing.
I hate to start off on a cynical note, but I don't think it's going to change much yet, because I have a feeling that in a lot of ways Hollywood has gone backwards, and we have less, in terms of racial diversity, we have less racial diversity now than we did like 10, 20 years ago in terms of TV shows, in terms of big budget movies. And a lot of times as people are pouring so much money into movies nowadays, they're thinking, well, we've got to make sure it's a hit. How do we make sure it's a hit? We've got to go by the rules, make sure there's a white guy and he's got a typical love interest and kicks ass. So he has a main part. Pacific Rim did very well, but I don't know if it did well enough to absolutely break through that. I don't know. I think it's still,
Yeah, I think we're still going to have to lean a lot on some of the independent creators like Guillermo who have this sort of clout to do what they want to and not be as restricted so much by marketing and business folks. So hopefully we can find other filmmakers that have this dedication to showing some of this diversity and doing a lot of the trope subversion that we do see in the movie, the lack of love interest and the way that women's roles are treated. So I think for the short term, we're going to have to rely just more on the creative clout of these directors before it starts becoming more mainstream.
So we're going to move on to the feminist aspects of Pacific Rim. Now, is anybody familiar with the Bechdel test? Okay. Anybody not familiar with the Bechdel test? Okay, would somebody mind explaining?
Well, the Bechdel test is a very basic test, and it is, to determine the, it's basically the lowest possible bar for female representation in the movie. And it's the first thing is, do you have more than one woman? Second is, do they talk to each other in the movie? The third is, do they talk to each other about anything other than a man? Okay, so most big budget action movies fail this test miserably. Anything that just because you pass a test doesn't mean it's wonderful feminist representation. Just because you fail it doesn't mean it's bad. In fact, once you look at aggregate, so many movies fail this because the man is basically like the universal human being, and the woman is like an adjunct to that universal human being. It's usually the way it works. So men represent men and women just represent this whole factor. So that's the problem. And the problem with Pacific Rim is that it does not pass this test. If Mako had spoken to Sasha for a little bit and we got that on screen, then it would have passed that test, but it didn't. On the other hand, Makomori is just, a fantastic and groundbreaking female, character just in so many different ways that, it does kind of show that the Bechdel test is not the be-all and end-all. Not that it's obsolete by any means, but, that you also need to judge female representation by other standards.
Now, it has since gone on to inspire another test, which is now the Makomori test. So it's basically, it's kind of along the same lines. So there is a female character. She's got her own story arc, and her story arc does not center around a man.
The Black Widow test? With Black Widow and the Avengers part?
No, Avengers.
Well, I mean, as far as a woman with her own story arc, the Makomori test as opposed to that type.
You tell me. I'm not familiar with Black Widow. Does she have her own story arc?
Yes, she does.
Yeah, she does her own man?
No, she does not.
Then we're good. Alright, but even after that, people still argue that Mako can't be considered a feminist character. Just because she doesn't have enough speaking lines. And how do we feel about that? She can't be considered a feminist character because she doesn't speak enough, because she can't be considered a main character because she doesn't speak enough. I mean, she's got some of the fewest roles in the movie. How do we feel about that?
I mean, the fewest lines.
Yeah, or the fewest. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about.
Do you want to answer questions first, or should I just jump into it? I can just talk.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, I think that that the whole idea that she has. Okay, I'm just going to turn it off for when we go into these movies, we have a prearranged story in our mind from so many other superhero or action or big budget movies that we've seen, and those are all arcs centered on male redemption, so on. Male redemption as highlighted or underlined by female suffering, sometimes women refrigerators, and because Pacific Rim doesn't follow that, I think it really confused a lot of people. They're like, okay, what is she a heroine or is she not? If she's a heroine, shouldn't she be, have guns and defy authority and be like this sort of Top Gun figure and so on? And she's not. She's using a different model of heroism, and in which she is respectful to her father. She does follow the rules. She doesn't, but she's so focused. Like everything about her is totally focused into this goal that she has of redeeming her family and saving the world. And in a way, if you watch a lot of Asian cinema, I think that, and I'm sure the creators have, even though Travis Beecham's original script is atrocious, that obviously and Guillermo del Toro, of course, has a long-time love of Asian cinema and Japanese and Chinese epic movies. And so I think what they're doing is he's kind of melding some tropes in from there, where themes like loyalty are more important than they are in typical big budget English language action movies. And so, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that's a really good point, especially the point you made coming into the movie with expectations, because the two criticisms I've seen about Mako is people misinterpret her quietness for submissiveness, and her rescue at the end as a maiden in distress sort of scenario when, in some ways you could say it's more of an homage to some of the earlier Godzilla movies where the rookie was rescued and the damaged veteran was the one who decided to sacrifice himself. It was not a male versus female issue, it was completely different, but because people are coming in with those expectations, I think they're misreading some of these tropes that are more common in Asian cinema.
Yeah, and I also think that probably, I don't think this was in the original script or the new one, but one of the most racist tropes, and there's a lot of them for Asian women in film, is Madame Butterfly. I will die for the love of the white man. I will sacrifice myself and contribute to his, and he can go on, be happy with his white woman, whatever, And that's Madame Butterfly, that's Miss Saigon. It's just kind of over and over again. And you see this a lot even in like cop shows or things. I think there was like a Sherlock, I don't know, I don't watch that show, but I heard it had really horrendous problems with that. But so and that totally avoids it because she does not die for him. He is ready to die for her. So her life is actually valuable, and it's shown as valuable. And that's incredibly important. And that's something that if you are an Asian woman who's grown up with a lot of these, I will die for my white man. I'm self-sacrificing. And the fact that she doesn't do that, that she is saved, that it doesn't fall into the damsel in distress. It's actually subverting that other, even more, like racist and anti-feminist trope.
I don't know. I think part of the reason that I love Mako's character is because, like, in movies, I feel like people are now like, okay, let's write a feminist woman character, but it's all the same character. Like, to be a feminist character, a woman has to be like super badass, and she has to be really loud, and she has to be really opinionated. Like, that's awesome. That's a great character, but that can fall into like really flat characters. Like, you don't have to have like just that one character. Like, hey, women are people, and women can be a million different combinations of personalities. And so I think like Mako's personality isn't like the typical one that you would see like the feminine action heroine having, and I think that's great because like I love seeing like Mako was written as a character and not as a flat woman. So like I think that like criticism of her character is not feminist or not a main character is ridiculous because she like subverts so many tropes that we've been seeing now about like just having such flat characters. And I don't know if anyone watches Game of Thrones. I'm sorry. But like there's a rift in the fandom or like in people who watch it, and there are these two sisters, and one of them is extremely feminine and that's Sansa, and one of them is extremely masculine and that's Arya, and people will tend to watch the show and say, well, I love Arya because she's a feminist character. And it's like, that's great, but you're only liking the feminine character who is extremely masculine, and you're only liking the feminine character who shows traditionally masculine traits. And it's possible to be a feminist character, and it's possible to be a round character and to have your own motivations and be traditionally feminine. Not that Mako is extremely feminine or anything, but we like, I don't know, I think that the representation of her is really misunderstood, and I think she's a really great character.
Yeah.
Well, basically what I tend to tell people is that like Mako's a protagonist. Like she has a protagonist arc. Raleigh just sort of like aligned, like he sort of does.
His arc peaks about a third of the way into the movie.
Yeah, and then it's like you have a picture that's been floating around, and then there's Mako, and there's all these so like I tell people like, well, Raleigh's a boring protagonist. I'm like, well, because he's not the protagonist.
It helps too if you use, a really sensitive to Guillermo's visual storytelling style. And when she comes out with the umbrella, that's like the heroic reveal.
Yeah, and Guillermo del Toro is just a master of, he won't say things, he won't tell you, he will show you. And some of the ways that he does that is through music and color and movement and composition. That builds up characters as much as saying, well, this is where she comes from, this is her mom and dad, and so on.
Well, yeah, and like even with the reveal, that's like a very specific music note that doesn't really happen throughout the rest of the film.
Yeah.
The reason Mako is I think overlooked as a character is because she is quiet, but the things that she says every single time she opens her mouth is significant. She takes her time and actually thinks about what she's going to say, and every time she says something, it is very significant to the plot or to her characterization. And because Guillermo del Toro works with female characters, I think, very well. Like, he revealed her vulnerability when she was a child with that flashback. She's a very well-rounded character. People just don't see it because she doesn't talk a lot.
Yeah, if you're going to the movie, the link is on already. You just have to expand this.
but the way they present her, even when she's not speaking, you can see the seriousness in her eyes. Literally, you can look at her eyes and see that she is focused on something. Now, whether it's peeking through the doorway at the guy on the other side taking his shirt off, or thinking about what she's going to do when she's, her 51 simulated exercises, you can tell she's got to focus.
Given that Hollywood tends to flatten characters into archetypes, do you think some of this is a reaction to the smaller set of archetypes handed to women in women roles versus the much wider ones that men employ?
Well, I think, in terms of archetypes, it doesn't have to be a bad word. Any kind of mythic story where you've got a lot of explosions and big things happening in the life of humanity, you can't really go into the little details that make people totally three-dimensional. You have to paint in broad strokes. So, I think people are expecting different kinds of broad strokes than they saw in this film.
I think it's just a lot of people come in thinking like the woman is an archetype rather than the hero.
Let's put it this way. Would we be questioning Mako's character if Mako was portrayed as a man versus a woman?
Then she could be strong and silent.
Then she could be strong and silent and not.
It'd be the story of a strong rookie who proves his worth and avenges his family. And no one, maybe outside the script, no one really explains Mako's story at that way.
But if they did that, would the movie have been so popular?
It might be popular for the reasons that we think it's popular for certain reasons. It speaks to us from some level, and it might have more wider appeal to that 18 to 35-year-old white male demographic. But is that the sort of popularity that we're looking for?
Yeah.
Is what's popular, what's good?
I think the promotion of the movie was not done really well.
I didn't even hear of it until I was dragged to it.
Yeah. How many people were actually dragged to the movie? Because we all thought.
I was waiting for
No, I
it.
Does anybody have anything to add about Mako?
More Mako feels.
Take one more.
Mako Mori.
The Mako Mori fan club.
Mako fan club. You mentioned her not having a whole lot of speaking roles. I just thought about how much of that could possibly be it being tailored to that actress. Because now that I think about it, I've seen 3 other movies with her in it, and most of them, even when she's one of the main characters, she doesn't say a whole lot. There's one where she's a voice actress, and she barely talks. It's mostly just still shots of her character. And she has maybe 10, 15 lines in the entire movie. There's one movie called Assault Girls where she does all sorts of crazy stuff. I don't think she has a line in that as far as I can remember.
Well, even in interviews, she does have a very thick accent. So it's very plausible that they might have cut the lines, but I think it kind of adds to her characterization.
Well, I meant like how much of it could possibly be because that's how her acting is strongest.
Well, no, it's really difficult for. When you have if she had been played by an Asian American actress, you could have had somebody who did speak, who could really have that mastery of English, and you wouldn't notice the accent and everything. But at the same time, she's known for being a really, really good actress. She's not actually as popular in Japan as she is outside of Japan, but it's like when you go outside to get an actress like that, you have to basically live with the fact that they're not going to speak perfect English because they weren't raised with that. That they're the way that they're used to acting is in their native language, and they might have the most amazing body language like she has, and this total command of facial expression and everything. But you got to work into the role that their English is not going to be perfect, or else you got to dub it.
As a person with Japanese heritage, what do you think of the incorporation of the Japanese language in a film that draws so heavily from certain aspects of Japanese culture, especially the group concept and everything? Do you think personally, I think it's a respectful thing to do, but as a person with Japanese heritage, what do you think about it?
What do I think about the use of Japanese?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a problem with that. I think it's great. I think it's just the right balance too, because if you're making a movie for English-speaking people, for an English market, then you got to have English. And they had a few lines that were in Japanese that were really beautiful whether you knew Japanese or not. So I thought the representation of Japan was great, for what it is, which is not a Japanese movie. It's a movie for an English-speaking audience. On the other hand, I think a lot more problems came in. Maybe we could, does that? No, actually, yeah, I can talk about that now. But in the novelization and some of the things about her backstory, and I had a big problem with, for example, the fact that when she was orphaned, they explained that she wasn't adopted by a relative or sent to live with a relative because they didn't like that she was a girl and she was learning the craft of sword making from her father. And that just sounds ridiculous to me. It seemed like they were thinking, okay, we have to fill in this plot thing of why she ended up a stagger, and instead of just leaving it open, which probably would have made more sense, people could fill it in however they want. Maybe the rest of her family died, or this or that. Instead, they're like, okay, some problem, okay, sexism, yeah, okay, that's why. And so they just pick that. And a lot of these actors or characters might not even be aware of their own backstories. And because there's a team of people working on this, at least 2 people, I don't expect everything to be coherent. So that is one thing that I would just like to ignore. This whole I was shunned by my family for being, wanting to be a female sword maker.
It doesn't make sense because the whole there are female Jaeger pilots. So obviously this is a culture in which, and there are female mechanics. Obviously it's developed to a point where women are a little less questioned for certain roles and careers.
Well, even it doesn't. I guess I'm skipping forward to the adoption question, but it doesn't even make sense in terms of family inheritance because one thing about adoption in Japan, this is true in modern Japan too, is that there's a long-standing tradition of adult male adoption. So if family name is about to die out, that's okay. There's just one daughter. Well, does anyone want to come in and marry into our family and change their last name to their wife's last name? And this actually happens a lot, and it's why some businesses in Japan can say, "Oh, we were around 1,000 years ago," and it's because they didn't have to do the strict patrilineal inheritance, so they could just adopt in. So the whole, that just seemed to me like kind of sloppy. But a lot of things about the backstories are sloppy. Including dates that don't match up. So I'm not a perfectionist. Yeah,
You're gonna
exactly.
find holes like that.
It's a giant monster movie. It should be hard to
In the previous panel, I gave a presentation on the original script, and I don't know if anyone knows, but Coco didn't speak any English in the original script. So, how do you think that went?
I don't even want to think about the original script. I'd rather not do that now.
There it goes. Okay, so we should be moving on.
Yes.
Okay. So, on the topic of strong female characters, let's talk about Sasha. She's obviously one of my favorite characters. You never know, right? Okay, so Sasha is an awesome character. She's a very minor character, but she has very few speaking lines, but her husband has no speaking lines at all.
I think he wants once.
It even goes so far as she's in the main pilot scene, which is and I just kind of want to point out that there's a little hole in the movie where okay, so her connector piece is on this side. They totally flipped it in the movie so she would be in the hot seat. Because she was the main pilot, because the main pilot's on the right side, which would be viewing from the left. Yeah.
I think it was more visually striking that way, because then you could see her speaking, lipstick, and just, I'm sure it had something to do with color theory. Yeah.
But even in their you can see behind when Riley's coming through the mess hall, they're the Kaitanovskis are in the background, and Sasha's kind of the leader, and she kind of takes a protective stance over her husband, and she's kind of the more powerful member of that couple. And I just think that's awesome. Yes.
So even when they're introduced, the way the camera's angled, Sasha's in focus, and then it's that is awesome. Well, yeah, okay. I'm just gonna pretend like it's.
And that's, and again, just another argument you can use because a lot of people don't really recognize Guillermo's visual storytelling in the movie. They just think it's just a genre movie and little things like that. Just, throw them out as tidbits to your friends saying, well, this is how he's communicating, even this background character, that the community has just built up so much because we have these really strong visual cues that communicate what she's probably like as a character. And it's just all done through camera shots and where she's staged in the air.
All right, so moving on. The movie has no romantic relationships represented. Like, none directly. And no kissing, no sex scenes. What do we think that does for the film industry?
Well, I'll just say, as a romance writer, I love romance. But at the same time, romance is like anything else, it needs to be done right. So if I would rather have no romance or romance in the background, then you take a cookie cutter romance or stamp it out and paste it in. That to me is just, it's like saying, okay, we're going to make a film, science fiction, here's an alien, here's a ray gun, okay, there we go, So I like that, I like that there wasn't any romance. I love romance, and I think it'd be great if we have romance. I love all different kinds of romance, all different pairings, gay, bisexual, male, female, non-binary. It doesn't matter, go crazy with it. But I think that Pacific Rim is a good move for doing that with kind of like in the background, because the main focus is humanity coming together, and most of the relationships are their family, their comradeship. You can take them a lot of different ways.
It's also probably easier to watch for asexuals and aromantic people.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So why do we think there's so much different perceived variations on sexuality in this film within the fandom?
I think the lack of any significant romance plot has a lot to do with that, because you can then overlay a lot of your own headcanons on there, and it still works within what we've seen in the context. I've seen all sorts of things written for, obviously, the Case Science Department is one of the more popular ones, but really across the board. And it's really interesting too, I find, in this particular fandom, is a lot of the fan works that are created are not just there as like a slash engine or a smut engine. People are actually writing really interesting, thoughtful relationships, because the theme of the film is so much about found families and love. It could be platonic love, teacher-student love, father-child love, sibling love, and I think that's really sparked people's imaginations to really explore the themes of love. Sometimes there's sex in there as well, and really do it across the spectrum, be it from asexual, aromantic side to our traditional, monogamous. Can't say that word.
Would it be better, instead of saying romance, to say passion is the theme of the movie?
Yes.
Because it's not really romantic love for everything. Like, you've got characters who are so intensely interested. You guys are about something. They're so passionate about it, and that's what drives the film. Like, Raleigh's passionate about Monko's passionate about revenge and fighting, and Stacker's passionate about Monko and fighting. Like, it's about passion and interest and drive.
Yeah, I think every character is informed in some way about a specific passion, and that may or may not be for another person.
One of the things I've noticed in post-apocalyptic visions of the future is, Walking Dead, the zombie soap opera aside, when there's this sense that people have to work together to, survive, a lot of that stuff is either sublimated or pushed aside. We have a monster coming at us, let's not go snog in the back room. And again, Pacific Rim brings that out beautifully. It's like, yes, we have these relationships, we have these feelings toward each other, but there's a kaiju coming out of Hong Kong Harbor. I think we need to deal with that first.
It actually avoids a lot of other action tropes that we've seen too. Think about a lot of genre films where there's infighting, like we get a little bit in that pack room with the wall of life, and you hear stuff in the background with the Rich fleeing inland, but we don't have those subplots. Actually, one of them was kind of cut, where there seemed to be a sort of K-side Newton versus Rally, jocks versus nerds things, which I'm very glad that was cut, even though it was a cute scene. It got rid of all of that sort of infighting or sabotage, or like the mad scientist going crazy and destroying everything. And it really did make it a humanity versus a larger threat, and I think that is unusual in a genre film.
For me, I'm asexual. Seeing Raleigh Beckett, who is so obviously just adores Mako, but there's nothing sexual about it. He just purely just wants to raise her up to the best of his ability, and seeing that on screen for me just really meant a lot, because it's this is how I feel about people, and it's nice to not have any sexual.
And I think it's really important to defend the reading of his "You look good," his compliment to Mako. It's not necessarily a sexual thing. It's you look like you are in the place that you belong. It does not have to be anything beyond that, and that is not.
Okay, I have one thing to add about, so when Mako's looking at Riley with his shirt off, I don't see it as sexual, and the way that it's because they deleted that one scene where Stepper has his shirt off, and he's got all the scars.
You can see it on his hands in a couple screenshots.
I do have to say though that I want to leave room for people to be like, oh my God, there's so much sexual tension between Mako and Raleigh. The day after they fight, that they go off and they have angry fighting sex. And it's awesome. I love that too. And I don't think we should erase that. I think that there's room for both visions. There's room for absolutely both visions. And women, can have sexual, sexual arcs without having romantic arcs in movies too. That'd be great.
What makes this movie so great is because there is so much left up to the interpretation, everyone can connect to it.
I also think that, I don't know, I really like the idea that Mako and Raleigh, that they can have an intimacy, and they can have the type of relationships that's strong enough to pilot a Jaeger together without necessarily being romantic first. And it's if it evolves in that way, but I think it's a really good representation that you can be extremely intimate with someone in a non-sexual way.
Or maybe they have sex, but they're not romantic.
But again, getting back to the post-apocalyptic aspect. Okay, the monsters are defeated, the rift is closed. Now where were we? And that was the impression I got at the end.
Yeah. And there's a lot of fan fiction authors that are exploring that to sort of, what happens is the corruption of the Jaeger program, when they're used to control the population. I think that's a really interesting fertile ground to capitalize on. It would be interesting to see if there is a sequel, if it turns to people versus people, which kind of negates our original optimistic theme, because that's another thing that really stood out about this movie. It's very optimistic compared to your traditional post-Napalm.
And I think Coco's directing style.
That is still,
It's very much about humanity and the group.
Yes. So I would hate to see, even though it kind of makes sense from a cool world-building standpoint, the corruption of the PPDC and Jaeger's fighting. You can get some really interesting stories. It feels different.
I'm sorry, this is one of those, I love Pacific Rim. Any sequel should be a prequel.
Yes.
But again, the rift is closed.
Yes.
Okay? They can reopen the rift for a sequel. And okay, that would be fun too. But this to me is one of those, you had all this story, this is the final battle, the story is done.
Yeah.
Closed, either happily ever after or sail off into the sunset. You had the massive amount of helicopters that are necessary for an action movie. It's done. It's done.
And it seems encouraging that Legendary doesn't want to do a sequel just to do a sequel. Hopefully they'll follow that and really be informed by Guillermo's decisions on it.
I don't know if anybody's been following Rumor Mill, but I know recently there was talk about something where the Jaegers are going to be connected to each other, and I'm just going to be so disappointed if that happens.
It sounds like a toy maker's.
I think all of these awesome things that Del Toro has built
I think if there's a sequel, it should be like kind of far future, and we go for revenge against the kaiju peasants. We open the rift ourselves and go in, you know. And so that way it would be even bigger scale. You know, it wouldn't just be doing the same thing.
What's concerning is the cultural collapse post the breach being destroyed, because as the first 5 minutes of the movie built up this entire culture surrounding kaiju and propaganda, and now that that's been dissolved, you know, what's going to happen to all the kaiju merchandise?
Limited edition, the price is all eBay. All on eBay.
Yeah, I was going to say if there was going to be a sequel, I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't work out to where, like, for example, take Shatterdome Blade, where they actually had spider crabs from space, so why not have something like, yeah, it's a good anime, don't get me wrong, it's a good anime, I love it, it's one of my favorites, but they actually had monsters in space. So what if you did something like, say the breach was just the quickest way to get to Earth, and they basically terraformed the planet for them, that's what they were attacking. So if you have them go back to the drawing board and say, well, we have to attack from space now instead of going through the breach, it's going to take us longer to get there. That way you do have time to build up the technology and the futuristic stuff going on, like either a Voltron kaiju or, you know, another example I had is a Mazin Kaiser SKL kaiju, where you have two pilots in there that can actually switch between each other and come up with two different styles, so it kind of keeps them on their feet. But that's just my opinion. There could be a sequel.
So we're running short on time, so we're going to move this along a little bit. So we're going to go back to the Bechtel test. Now, they didn't pass the Bechtel test for women, but there is another modified version, other than the Montgomery test, for racial diversion, like the diversity. So that's basically like there are two people that are not white, they have a conversation together, and they have a conversation about something other than a white person. So they did pass that test. And in addition to that, we have something that we don't see in films pretty much at all, and that's a functioning family unit that aren't biologically related, that are multiracial. So how do we feel about this?
I mean, there's a lot of adoption in movies because adoption is dramatic. You know, there's a story. I mean, it's the same reason why there's a lot of PTSD in movies, because you can attach stories to that. But I think that the you know, the way that we have adoption presented in this movie is really interesting, and it's also has anyone seen The Host? That Korean movie, The Host? Yes. Yeah. And The Host has adoption in it in a major way, and it's also sort of woven into this whole, like, you know, like who picks up the pieces when, you know, in the face of a catastrophe. And it's a different adoption arc. So really, when I saw Pacific Rim, that reminded me of it so much. I mean, they left open that little mystery at the beginning of the movie. How are Stacker and Mako related? What is their relationship? And then it's like it's revealed when he takes off his helmet and then it's such a beautiful moment. I mean, just visually, it's like, oh. But yeah, I think it's a great aspect of the story, and it weaves together so many arcs in just this perfect, very inspiring way.
I like the fact that they use Mako to represent the coming of age story. You know, rather than say Raleigh or even like Chuck Hansen. You know, yes, Chuck Hansen had his own growing up to do, and you know, he finally did it at the end.
For prequel.
You know,
I love Chuck.
But the primary coming of age was watching Mako go from student to, you know, now I'm an equal, now I am battling, and essentially takes over, in a sense, Stacker's place as the member of the family who's still one of the Jaegers.
And he asked her too to be the protective force.
Yeah.
Well, I come from many different families, but I think one of my favorite parts of the McElroy and Stacker family is that it shows a black male being very tender and very loving, which is for the most part will be reserved for like the black female characters, like the motherly characters, or like anything like that. It's very rare to see that type of person and as a black male, and so that part of my family is like super excited
a lot, so like you get hits of that in the movie, and I just thought that was really nice back to like you can tell that he grew up in this like environment that was, you know, first generation or something.
It's a multiracial, multicultural environment where he's code switching, you know, he's using some different languages.
What was really cool was they provided, you know, subtitles for Mako most of the time, but then right before Pentecost died, they didn't. And she said, and I know what they said because I took Japanese, but the people who haven't don't know, and it's really tender and sad. And I think it was very special and respectful. And
Does anybody not know what she said?
It's okay.
Break your hearts.
What was the exact word?
Sensei Aishima.
Yeah, which basically means I love
T-shirt.
I love it. Teacher, like looks like I like her. Okay, keep in mind that I got dragged to this movie. I did not want to go. I had no interest in seeing this at all. My friend was like, "Let's go. I'll buy you a couple of drinks," because the movie theater that we go to has a bar. So I was like, "That like free booze. Let's do this." Okay, and we come out of that movie. I've got like tears running down my face. And I'm just like, "That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen." Yes, that was the next point coming up. We're kind of getting stuck on points here. So the movie has like a lot of represented disabilities, not just like the physical disabilities like Herman's leg or like Pentecost's like yeah. But we're also seeing a lot of like mental disabilities too, and it's mostly like implied. But like, how do we feel about it? How do we are you connected to these people more because they have these disabilities, and like who are we connected to most because of these? Like,
I think it's refreshing that all of them again avoid some of the obvious tropes from the physical side. Like in any other action movie, I would expect Herman to be somewhere with his disability pinned down and have to be saved. Newton might be really overtly called the crazy one, and you don't know what you're doing. We make jokes about Raleigh's man pain, but if you look at his arc of recovery, you know, he spends that sort of 6 years in some of his own self-care, removed from this situation. And I think that's really important there. So while everybody has these disabilities, whether overt or implied, that's just not the only part of their character. And a lot of them just kind of overcome it just in subtle ways. You know, if I were listening to the movie, I would have never known that Herman had the cane and was disabled, for example. It's a part of his overall palette and character type, but he doesn't fit into the trope of the disabled.
I could see PTSD in both Raleigh and Stryker.
And Mako.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You see PTSD, but you can see how they all handle it differently. Mako focused on revenge. Raleigh had pulled himself back, withdrew until, you know, Stacker said, "No, you come now." And Stacker's just, until the end, I've got to see this through.
And if you go into some of the backstories of the Hansons, even, Herc, you could read a lot, and that affects his relationship with Chuck, you know.
it's just kind of like everybody copes, and like I love the Hansons. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I am like a total Chuck fangirl. But like you look at them and like their coping mechanisms like really built their characters, and like their loss of Angela, Chuck's mom, Herc's wife, like the way that they cope really, like, it drifted them apart, but it makes their characters. And I think the different coping mechanisms throughout the movie kind of does that too. Like, I know it's not explained in the movie, but like Riley and Yancey, they lost their mom to cancer. Their dad ran out on them. Their sister ran away. They were left alone. What else are they gonna do? They're gonna join the military. I mean, all of these bad things that are happening to these people like really built everything up.
And I think the world too has very complex responses to trauma, you know, to the kaiju breaching. I mean, you've got
cities on top of it.
you've got really inspiring, you know, people coming together. I imagine that, you know, you have this big, like, obviously the tensions in East Asia must have, dissipated a lot for working together so closely over there. So, I mean, there's that, the people really coming together, but there's also some maladaptive coping strategies, like the Church of the Breach, which is clearly, the wrong way to go about that, and
Did anybody get one of those fantastic flyers this morning?
The Church of yeah, those are great.
Have you accepted trespasser as your Lord?
To the gaming guys, they have.
You guys. Yeah, because we're kind of running low on time. So anything anybody wants to add?
Sorry.
I'd like to talk about Newton Geisler and his applied disabilities. It's been headcanoned that he might have, for instance, bipolar disorder. He might be on the autistic spectrum. He has quite a fixation with kaiju, to an extraordinary degree. People do not understand why he's painted them all over his body. At the same time, he uses it to his advantage. He uses it to save the world. And as far as bipolar disorder goes, he seems to have gone through the movie possibly in a hypomanic state. But the way it is represented, it's in a positive way. This is the thing that has gotten him through. It's not saying that, now he's unstable and they're going to have to deal with the aftermath if something happens to them. I find that really refreshing. I myself have bipolar disorder, and it is very hard to find sort of positive representation of that mental illness in particular in any type of media. So I found that exceedingly refreshing and entertaining. This is one of the things that I like the most about it.
Well, you can see a lot of the earlier in the plot, the pushback against his wanting to drift with the kaiju could easily be, it's not a good use of resources, it's untested, we can't afford to lose you, Newton, and not just, it's just a crazy idea. In fact, when he proves himself, everybody is really immediately on board. So that's something that you really consider.
Anything else?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Yes.
That's the thing, like Herman and all these characters, they're allowed to be heroes, whereas in so many other films, they would have been like punished for the role they play.
Which is what makes this movie so great. We can all be the hero.
Or they would have gotten one of those rewards that's not really a reward. You'll see that in a lot of genre flicks where there's the nerdy character. The reward is, you're no longer a nerd. It's like, what if I'm like that? That's who I am, So they get to be who they are throughout the whole movie and be heroic.
You mentioned two things that I don't know why I never put this together, but listening to you guys are just making things. You mentioned Herman with his cane as being a representation of disability. You mentioned character language. It seems like when you watch the movie that Guillermo del Toro is intentionally using his disability as a character, as a way to explain his character. Like if you look, he doesn't just lean on his cane. He's almost angrily pushing down on it. He's always tense.
Yes.
Every single muscle is bound around using this thing, and when he gestures with it, it's very aggressive and very. He doesn't. It's not a smooth motion. It's this.
Very much. It definitely helps broadcast his character is very tightly wound. And it helps too with the yin-yang aspects of Newton and Herman. Herman's got a physical disability. You can read Newton as being neuroatypical. Newton's just everywhere and loose, and Herman's very, very tightly wound. So it helps too, just kind of show that these two different characters end up being two parts of a greater whole.
Well, my thing with Herman's tenses, whenever I watched it, when I first watched it, I felt very connected immediately because it felt very you look how I feel. Like if I grew up with mental disabilities since I was 8 with a lot of anxiety disorders. So I was sort of conditioned to hide it and not show it physically and not be tense all the time and not. So I was sort of made possess a certain way. Whereas with Herman, he was allowed to sort of be tense and wear trillion jackets, and that's how I would probably look if I did not. So I would change myself. So I always interpreted Herman as someone with anxiety.
I have one main speaking point that I do want to go over real quick, and that's about the triplets. Nobody ever talks about the triplets. Okay, one, I'm going to commend them for actually casting triplets. Instead of relying on So, but like the main thing is like we're in China. These are the only Chinese pilots. These are the only Chinese characters that we see in the movie that have names. They don't really have any like lines or anything. But they're the only named characters in China. We're in China. We're like on their turf, and like they're the only Chinese characters. Like that just doesn't add up to me.
But I mean, I thought the crowd looked pretty good, like as far as like the Shatterdome workers.
It depends on what scene you're looking at. Because like you could go to like where Safner's giving his speech and like it pans out to the crowd. Like the first 4 or 5 rows of people in that crowd, they're all white people. And then everybody else past that range. Like it just like makes me mad.
Well, you know, the way I look at it is, you know, it's a continuum. It's a compromise. And you think of something like Firefly that whitewashed the entire universe. You know, and Pacific Rim stacks up pretty well against that. You know, if Firefly got an F, Pacific Rim is more like a, you know, B minus C plus.
They did a great job of racial diversity, but when you're in China, I want to see more Chinese people.
Tendo. Yeah,
it's
Tendo Joy was half, or he was at least part Chinese. He's Peruvian Chinese, mixed race.
That apparently
The fact that he is a multiracial, you know, Asian from is definitely in the graphic novel. So it's definitely, that's not just something that Travis Beacham thought up. You know, it's actually, or if it is just something he thought up, it's actually been put down there in visual semi-canonical form.
Yeah, but then you also not distracted from that. I understand that you're in Hong Kong, 96% Chinese, even under British rule. I get that. But the idea was everybody who had worked in the data program all over the Pacific Rim were brought to Hong Kong. So it could be hand-waved that way. But the fact that when they go to the street in Hong Kong, and I've been to Hong Kong a few times when I was in the Navy, that street they had, that set they had where the Animal Chow had his shot, that looked like Hong Kong. I mean, there are streets in Wan Chai and up in the New Territories that look just like that. They did that well. And they did it honestly. It wasn't, this is what we expect Western tourists to see when they get there. They say, this is what it looks like. And, you know, for that,
well, as much as I love Ron Perlman, I loved him since I saw him in the very first Guillermo del Toro movie, Cronus. But I'm a little bit iffy about his character because that is a role that could have gone to a Chinese actor, not somebody who was like surprised his white guy was Chinese. But on the other hand, I really appreciated the visuals of that scene. You know, you had the woman with the big arms, you know, she's super androgynous Chinese enforcer woman, you know, and that was a really nice. All those little details that he puts in really added up, and I like that a lot. I mean, it's a mixed bag. There's the good and the bad.
Yeah, and I think it's important, you know, for anything that you really love, don't let that blind you to questioning things like creative motive or final decisions that were made, and recognize that even things that you really like can be problematic to a degree, and be open to talking about those problems and addressing them and seeing, you know, how they can be alleviated in the future.
Got 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Pacific needs more moms. It's like all dads. All dads. And like Zach's always mom.
There was a topic that we kind of skimmed over because we don't have time for it. Vanessa!
Oh, yes. Allison, you did Jamie, I say it's you.
Well, in general, Pacific Rim needs more women too.
Well, yeah.
There's only 2 names. They're awesome female
Women
characters.
off age too. I mean, if you have to kind of go into the expanded material to get to people like Luna and Tamsa.
So Tashi was a mother.
Very good.
But it is necessary.
I think the guys were very so guys are very organic creatures, and that could be seen as a sort of feminine energy, as opposed to the Jaeger's, you know, hard lines and organics.
Well, I guess like the moms that we do get, like I think Dr. Raleigh, and I guess we think that would be it. seemed like she was just smoking and like I don't want to listen to anyone, and then like she died of cancer, and like I don't know, it just felt like most moms that are in there just seem to be there.
It'd be nice to avoid the cliche of the single parent. You know, that you see in even Disney movies. You know, let's see two living, functional, parents in a loving relationship with their children.
And of course, Kirk and his wife being very attractive.
I originally went into Pacific Rim thinking, oh god, flat monster movie, bring out the mechas. But when I actually saw it, it was like, for all the reasons everybody here loves it, what I took away from it was, you have all these flawed characters. I mean, nobody was the noble hero. I mean, everybody came into it with their own baggage. This was one of those movies where you didn't have the one hero or the two heroes. That you had all these people who came together. Literally, everybody had their voice in the choir. And if one of them was missing, it would probably not have succeeded as well as it did. And this is why I say Mako and Raleigh are on the raft and the helicopters are coming and the story there. Because then you start seeing
Can't complete it any more than that.
yeah, because beyond that, everything that
Can't make it any better.
yeah, because beyond that, when you start telling the story, okay, the threat is gone, and then everybody goes their separate ways. In their previous, they may have been clear of their original prejudices, but they eventually come back. I mean, look at America after 9/11. After 9/11, America more or less came together.
It's time to now. I don't know if America came together. That's a real phenomenon. More like America has come apart.
Yeah.
All right, guys,
Thank you, everybody.